There is a silence that comes after everything has been taken. It is not peace. It is the hollowed-out quiet of a world that has forgotten your name, a stillness carved from the bone of memory. Hope, in such a silence, is a dangerous and fragile thing, a wildflower growing in the cracks of a tomb, destined to be crushed. For years, this silence had been my only companion, the cold shroud I wrapped around the embers of a life that was never truly mine. I was the last echo of a song no one remembered how to sing, the final fading brushstroke of a masterpiece long since burned to ash. And in that desolation, I had learned a terrible, simple truth. To be the last of anything is to be eternally alone. The world moves on, but you remain, a ghost tethered to a graveyard. CTA 1. If you're already hooked by Alara's story, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. The rain fell on the leaky roof of my hovel with the relentless percussion of 1,000 tiny hammers, each drop a reminder of the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It was a damp, clinging cold that had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the silver lacework that crept over my skin. From my right temple it branched down my neck and over my shoulder, a delicate, terrifying filigree that pulsed with a faint, lunar light in the darkness, the mark of the Lunara, the brand of the extinct. My people had been keepers of the moon's quiet magic, weavers of silver light and silent dreams. Then the blight came, a creeping shadow that turned our magic inward, consuming us from within until our own light became a poison. I alone had survived, a child found weeping in a village of silver statues, my skin etched with the very power that had killed my kin. Now it was my curse. In the surrounding villages they called me the blight-marked, the carrion child. A bad omen. A thing to be shunned, stoned, and driven into the deepest parts of the Wailing Woods, where monsters were said to roam. They were not wrong. I was a monster, of a kind. A monster of memory, of survival. I huddled closer to the pathetic fire, its meager warmth doing little to combat the gnawing hunger in my belly. My last piece of dried meat was gone yesterday, and the snares I had set this morning were empty, washed clean by the storm. Outside, the wind howled like a grieving wolf, tearing at the sod and timber of my shelter. It was a sound I knew well. Loneliness had a voice, and it sounded like the wind. A sudden, sharp crack of lightning illuminated my small world for a heartbeat. In that flash, I saw them. Figures. Not the shambling ghouls or hungry beasts of the forest, but tall, broad shapes standing motionless at the edge of the clearing. They wore dark cloaks that seemed to drink the very rain from the air, and they stood with an unnatural stillness, a predator's patience. My heart, a frantic bird in the cage of my ribs, slammed against my sternum. Villagers. They had finally worked up the courage to come for me, to finish the job the blight had started. I scrambled backward, my hand closing around the handle of the rusted skinning knife that was my only weapon. It was a pitiful defense, a child's toy against the righteous fury of a mob. The fire sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows that made the figures seem to swell and shrink. One of them stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that was utterly at odds with the sucking mud of the forest floor. He was larger than the others, a giant carved from night and stone, and as he drew closer, the hood of his cloak fell back. The storm seemed to hold its breath. He was not a villager. No farmer or woodsman possessed such a face. All sharp angles and brutal beauty, a countenance that spoke of ancient lines and absolute authority. His hair was the color of spun gold, darkened by the rain, and his eyes were molten gold, glowing with an inner fire that defied the gloom. They fixed on me, and in their depths, I saw not hatred, not fear, but an intensity that stripped the air from my lungs. It was the gaze of a king and of a wolf. This was not a mob. This was something far more terrifying. This was power. CTA-2. The Alpha King has arrived. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think he's here to help or harm Ilara? He stopped just inside the threshold of my crumbling doorway, his presence filling the small space until it felt like the walls themselves were groaning under the pressure. The rain dripped from his jaw, tracing a line down the hard column of his throat. He did not speak. He simply watched me, his golden eyes tracing the path of the silver marks on my skin. I expected revulsion, disgust, the same sick fascination I saw in the eyes of others before they threw their stones. Instead, I saw reverence, a strange aching sorrow that made no sense. His gaze was not an accusation, it was a discovery. He looked at my curse, the brand of my extinction, as if he had just found a lost star. My internal monologue was a frantic scream, a litany of terror. He sees it. He sees the blight. He knows what I am. Run, fight, die. But do not let him touch you. My knuckles were white on the hilt of the knife. My body trembled, a leaf in the storm of his arrival. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the rain and the frantic beat of my own heart. Who was he? Why was he here? The men behind him remained as still as statues, their faces hidden in shadow, but I could feel their collective focus, a palpable weight on my soul. This was an execution, then. A royal one, far more formal than I had ever imagined my end would be. I had always pictured stones and pitchforks, the panicked, cruel faces of common folk. Not this terrible, silent majesty. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, a rumbling growl that resonated in my chest, the sound of rocks grinding together deep within the earth. You are Ilara. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, of a truth he had sought for a very long time. I could not find my voice to answer. I could only nod, a jerky, pathetic movement. His eyes softened for a moment, the molten gold swirling with an emotion I could not name. It looked like relief. It looked like pain. I am Theron, he said, as if the name itself should mean everything. And perhaps it did, to someone else. To me, it was just the name of the man who had come to kill me. King of the Sunstone Lichens, Alpha King. The name whispered through the darkest corners of my memory, a title from stories meant to frighten children. The Wolf Changers. The Lords of Fire and Fury who ruled the sun-scorched lands to the east. What would such a king want with the last blighted remnant of the Lunara? My mind raced, trying to piece together a puzzle whose edges were all sharp. He took another step into the hovel, and I flinched, pressing myself harder against the damp earthen wall. I raised the knife, the rusted blade trembling in my hand. It was absurd. A mouse threatening a hawk. A flicker of something. Amusement? Pity? Crossed his features. He ignored the blade completely. His focus remained on my face, on the silver mark that pulsed with my fear. I have been searching for you for a very long time, he continued, his voice softer now, yet losing none of its power. Your bloodline. It cannot end. My bloodline? The words were a shock, a splash of icy water. My bloodline was a poisoned well, a lineage of death. It was nothing to be preserved. It was a thing to be mourned and forgotten. What do you want? I finally managed to rasp, my voice hoarse from disuse and terror. He looked from the knife to my eyes, and a profound weariness settled on his beautiful, harsh features. I have made a vow, he said, and the words were an oath, ancient and unbreakable. To protect what remains of the Lunara, to protect you, protect me. The concept was so alien I almost laughed, a hysterical broken sound. No one protected the blight marked. They drove it away. They tried to burn it out. Protection was a lie, a word used by predators to lull their prey into a false sense of security. I shook my head, the movement sharp with disbelief. No one protects a curse, I whispered, the words tasting of ash. Theron's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. The molten gold of his eyes flared. What they call a curse, he growled, the sound vibrating through the very floorboards. I call a miracle. You are not a curse, Ilara. You are survival. He took the final step that separated us, his shadow falling over me completely. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a furnace against the damp chill of my existence. He reached out, his hand large and calloused, and before I could react, before I could bring my pathetic knife to bear, he gently took my wrist. His touch was not forceful, but it was absolute. With his other hand, he reached toward my face. I squeezed, my eyes shut, bracing for a blow, for the searing pain of his touch. Instead, the pads of his fingers, warm and rough, traced the silver filigree on my temple with an impossible tenderness. It was the first gentle touch I had felt in a decade. A tear escaped my closed eyelid, tracing a hot path through the grime on my cheek. His thumb brushed it away. "You are the last," he murmured, his voice thick with a sorrow that mirrored my own, "and I will not let you fall." CTA 3. Is anyone else getting major butterflies right now? Like this video if you're rooting for Theron and Ilara. The journey from the Wailing Woods to the Sunstone Citadel was a blur of motion and sensation. Theron had wrapped me in a thick fur-lined cloak that smelled of pine and ozone, and something uniquely him, a scent of warm stone and distant fire. He had lifted me onto his massive black warhorse as if I weighed nothing, seating me in front of him. The proximity was a constant, terrifying torment. His chest was a solid wall at my back, his arms a cage around me. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my spine, a rhythm so vital and alive it seemed to mock the quiet desolation of my own existence. We rode for days, his silent guards flanking us, their movements synchronized and silent. They were wolves in men's skin, and I, a broken lamb, was being carried directly into their den. I did not speak. I barely breathed. I simply endured, my mind a maelstrom of confusion and fear. Why this strange reverence? Why this talk of protection? It was a trick. It had to be. A gilded cage is still a cage. The Sunstone Citadel was not carved from the mountains. It was the mountain, hollowed out and shaped by fire and will. It rose from the scorched plains like a colossal fang, its towers piercing the clouds, its golden rock glowing under the relentless sun. As we passed through the great gates, the heat was a physical blow. The air shimmered, thick with the scents of hot metal, roasting meat, and the sharp, musky odor of the lichens themselves. The people who filled the cavernous halls were as fiery and vibrant as their home. They were tall and strong, with sun-kissed skin and hair in shades of gold, russet, and flame. And their eyes, all of them had the same molten gold eyes as their king. Eyes that now fixed on me with open hostility. They did not see a rescued maiden. They saw an intruder. A pale, silver-marked creature of the night dragged into their bastion of sunlight. Whispers followed us like grasping shadows. The blight-marked. A creature of the moon. What weakness is this, that our king brings a shadow into the heart of the sun? I shrank into the warmth of Theron's cloak, pulling the hood lower over my face, wishing I could disappear into its folds. But Theron's arm remained a steady, unyielding presence around my waist. He did not acknowledge the whispers. He walked through the great hall as if he were the only one in it, his stride long and confident, his gaze fixed forward. His silence was not ignorance, it was a command. She is with me. She is untouchable. The message was clear, even if the reason for it remained a mystery to me. He led me to a suite of rooms high in the citadel's central spire. The chambers were larger than my entire hovel, furnished with rich tapestries, carved wooden furniture, and silks the color of sunset. A balcony opened onto a breathtaking view of the sprawling kingdom below. It was a luxurious prison. A servant girl, young and nervous, with wide, fearful eyes, was instructed to bring me food, water, and fresh clothes. She scurried in and out, never meeting my gaze, her hands trembling as she set down a tray laden with food I could not imagine eating. When she was gone, I stood in the center of the vast room, feeling smaller and more lost than I had in my forest solitude. There, my loneliness was a familiar blanket. Here, it was a vast echoing chasm. Theron returned that evening as the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent strokes of orange and purple. He found me on the balcony, watching the world I did not belong to. He had shed his heavy traveling leathers for a simple tunic that did little to conceal the raw power of his physique. He carried no weapon, yet his presence was more formidable than any sword. He stood beside me, his shoulder nearly brushing mine, and for a long time we watched the sky bleed into darkness in silence. The silence between us was different from the silence I had always known. It was not empty. It was filled with unspoken things, a tension that hummed in the air like a plucked string. "Why am I here?" I asked, my voice small against the vastness of the evening. He turned his head, his golden eyes catching the last rays of sunlight. "I told you. To be protected." "Protected from what?" "Your people look at me like I'm a plague." "They do not understand," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They fear what is different. They have forgotten the balance." "The balance?" I echoed, confused. He leaned his forearms on the stone balustrade, his gaze sweeping over his kingdom. "My people draw their strength from the sun. It gives us fire, passion, power. But it is a fire that can burn out of control. For generations, the Lunara magic, the quiet, steady pull of the moon, kept that fire in check. It was a necessary harmony. Your people were our anchors, our calm in the storm." He paused, and a deep sadness entered his eyes. "When the blight took your people, that balance was broken. My people. We have been running too hot ever since. Our tempers are shorter, our rages less controllable. A fever has taken root in our blood, a consequence of unchecked power." It was beginning to make a horrifying kind of sense. I was not a person to him. I was a tool, a key, a magical artifact to be used to fix his people. The hope that had flickered to life with his gentle touch on my face died, turning to cold, familiar ash. He was no different. From the villagers who saw me as an omen, they saw a curse to be destroyed. He saw a cure to be possessed. The result was the same. I was a thing, not a person. My worth was tied to the silver marks on my skin and the blood in my veins. The realization was a sharp physical pain in my chest. I turned away from him, wrapping my arms around myself. "So you brought me here to use me," I said, my voice flat and dead. "You want to drain my magic, use my blood to cool the fever in yours." A harsh sound escaped him, something between a growl and a sigh. "No." The word was sharp, absolute. I felt his warmth as he stepped closer behind me. "Alara, look at me." I refused, keeping my eyes fixed on the distant darkening mountains. His hand landed gently on my shoulder, his touch sending a jolt through my entire body. He slowly, deliberately, turned me to face him. His golden eyes were blazing, not with anger, but with a fierce, desperate intensity. "I will not lie to you," he said, his voice raw. "Your presence here, the return of your magic to this land, is vital for my people's survival. That is my duty as king. But my vow was not to a cure. It was not to a tool. My vow was to a people my ancestors failed to protect. It was a vow to a little girl who survived the unsurvivable. It is a vow to you. CTA 4. The plot thickens. Comment below. What do you think Theron's true intentions are? His gaze dropped to the silver marks on my neck, the filigree that was now faintly glowing in the twilight. His fingers followed his gaze, tracing the lines with that same unnerving reverence. I look at this, he murmured, his voice dropping to a near whisper, and I do not see a blight. I do not see a curse. I see the strength of the moon itself. I see a light that refused to be extinguished. When my people look at you, they see a shadow. When I look at you, I see the only thing that can make us whole again. Not by being used, but by being. His words were a torrent, washing over the walls I had built around my heart. I wanted to believe him. Gods, how I wanted to. But belief was a luxury I had never been able to afford. Trust was a language I had long forgotten how to speak. He speaks of balance, of wholeness. But what of my wholeness? What of the life that was stolen from me? He sees a symbol, a solution. Does he see the girl cowering behind it? The girl who is so terrified she can barely breathe in his presence? The internal monologue was a shield, a desperate attempt to protect myself from the devastating hope his words threatened to ignite. Hope was the most dangerous poison of all. It made you lower your guard. It made you forget that the world was filled with teeth. I pulled away from his touch, the loss of his warmth an immediate aching void. I am not your salvation, King Theron, I said, my voice colder than I intended. I am a ruin, and ruins are best left alone. I turned and fled back into the gilded cage of my rooms, leaving him alone on the balcony as the first stars began to appear in the night sky, distant and cold and impossibly far away. The days that followed settled into a strange, tense rhythm. I remained a prisoner in my opulent rooms, though the door was never locked. Theron visited me each evening, always at sunset. He would bring me things: a rare, night-blooming flower from the mountain peaks, a book of ancient Lunara legends he had salvaged from a ruined library, a small, intricately carved silver wolf. They were peace offerings, attempts to breach the walls I kept so firmly in place. We rarely spoke more than a few words. He would tell me about his day, the endless disputes and challenges of ruling a people of fire and passion. He spoke of his fears for them, the fever that made them reckless. He never asked for anything. He just talked. And I listened, a silent ghost in the corner of his life. During the day, I was left to the mercies of the court. When I dared to venture from my rooms, I was met with glares and whispers. The Sunstone Lycans were a proud, physical people. They laughed loudly, fought fiercely, and loved with a possessive passion. My quiet, watchful presence was anathema to them. I was a wraith at their feast, a spot of moon-silver tarnish on their golden world. A particular source of torment was a high-ranking warrior named Kale. He was second only to Theron in strength and influence, with hair the color of cooling embers and eyes like chips of obsidian. Where Theron was a contained storm, Kale was a wildfire. He made no secret of his disdain for me. He saw me as a weakness in his king, a foreign contaminant that threatened their purity. The alpha grows soft, I heard him sneer to his companions one afternoon as I passed through a courtyard. He consorts with shadows and calls it wisdom. The Lunara blight destroyed them for a reason. Their magic was weak. We should have let it die. His followers laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I flinched, pulling my cloak tighter and hurried my steps. But Kale was not content to let me pass. He moved to block my path, his large frame an intimidating barrier. "Where do you go, little ghost?" he purred, his voice laced with menace. Afraid the sun will burn you away? I kept my eyes on the ground, my heart hammering. Do not engage. Do not show fear. He feeds on it. Please, let me pass, I whispered. He laughed again. The creature speaks. Tell me, Blight marked, what spells are you whispering in our king's ear? Are you poisoning his mind as your blood poisoned your own people? His words were barbs, each one finding a tender, wounded place. He was voicing my own deepest fears, that I was a contamination, that I would bring ruin to this place, just as it had come to my own. Before I could respond, a shadow fell over us. She goes where she pleases, Kale. Theron's voice was deceptively calm, but it held an undercurrent of seismic fury. The air crackled with sudden tension. Kale's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he composed his features into a mask of challenging arrogance. He turned to face his king. "My king," he said, with a slight, mocking inclination of his head. "I was merely welcoming our guest, ensuring she feels at home." "Your welcome sounds like a threat," Theron stated, his golden eyes narrowed to slits. He stepped between us, positioning his body as a shield, completely blocking me from Kale's view. The protective gesture was so instinctual, so absolute, that it stole my breath. "She is under my protection. That protection extends to the venom of your tongue. Are we clear?" The challenge hung in the air, thick and heavy. For a moment, I thought Kale would refuse, that the two alphas would come to blows right there in the courtyard. The power rolling off both of them was immense, a physical pressure that made the very stones seem to vibrate. Kale held Theron's gaze for a long moment, his obsidian eyes unblinking. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he bowed his head. "Crystal, my king." The submission was reluctant, edged with resentment. He shot one last look of pure hatred in my direction before turning and stalking away, his followers trailing in his wake like jackals. The courtyard emptied quickly, leaving Theron and me alone in the oppressive sunlight. My entire body was trembling with reaction. Theron turned to me, his face a mask of controlled rage. He reached out as if to touch my arm, then seemed to think better of it, letting his hand fall to his side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice still rough with anger. I could only nod, unable to trust my voice. The humiliation and fear were a bitter knot in my throat. He saw the tremor in my hands and his expression softened, the fury replaced by a deep, aching regret. "This is my fault," he said, his voice low. "I brought you into this den of wolves without preparing them. Without preparing you. I thought my word would be enough to keep you safe." "You cannot command their thoughts," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "They see what they see. A monster." "No," he said, the word a fierce growl. He stepped closer, his intense gaze pinning me. "They see what they fear. They fear the change you represent. They have grown used to the fire, to the rage, the thought of calm, of balance. It feels like weakness to them. They are wrong." He looked around the empty courtyard at the golden stone that seemed to pulse with heat. "Come," he said, his voice gentle now. "Let me show you something. A place where you will not be judged." He held out his hand. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to hide. But then I looked at his hand, strong, calloused, the hand of a king and a warrior, and remembered its impossible tenderness when it had touched my face. I remembered the way he had stood between me and Kale, an unbreachable wall. Slowly, tentatively, I placed my trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, his warmth seeping into my cold skin, and for the first time, it did not feel like a cage. It felt like an anchor. CTA 5. This is such an emotional moment. If you're feeling all the feels, smash that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Theron led me away from the sun-drenched courtyards and public halls, down winding stone corridors that delved deep into the heart of the mountain citadel. The air grew cooler, quieter, the sounds of the court fading behind us until all I could hear was the soft scuff of our boots on the stone and the thundering of my own heart. He brought us to a heavy iron-bound door, which he opened with a large, ornate key. He gestured for me to enter, his hand still holding mine. I stepped across the threshold and gasped. We were in a vast circular chamber, but it felt as though we had stepped into the heart of a moonlit night. The ceiling was a dome of what looked like polished obsidian, but it was embedded with thousands of tiny glowing crystals that glittered like a perfect star field. In the center of the room, a round pool of water, still and dark as glass, reflected the star-dusted ceiling perfectly. The only light came from the crystals and from softly glowing moss that grew in crevices in the stone walls, casting a gentle, silver-green luminescence over everything. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth, night-blooming jasmine, and something else. Something that felt like my own forgotten magic. It was a sanctuary of twilight in a kingdom of unrelenting sun. "What is this place?" I breathed, my voice filled with awe. "It is the moon chamber," Theron said, his voice a respectful murmur. He finally released my hand, though I immediately missed its warmth. It was built by my ancestors, in the time when the bond between our peoples was strongest. The Lunara priestesses would come here to meditate, to commune with the moon even from within the heart of the mountain. It has been sealed for a century. No one has been inside but me. He walked toward the pool, his large frame seeming less overwhelming in the soft light. Here, in this space that honored my heritage, he seemed different. The harsh edges of the Alpha King softened, revealing the weary man beneath. He looked at me, his golden eyes seeming almost silver in the reflected starlight. "I thought you might find some peace here, a piece of home." The gesture was so thoughtful, so profoundly kind, it left me speechless. He had not just offered me safety, he had sought out and opened a part of his home that was a relic of mine. He had given me a sanctuary that spoke my own language of silence and silver light. I walked to the edge of the pool and gazed down at my reflection. The face that looked back was pale and haunted, but for the first time, the silver marks that traced my skin did not look like a blight. In this light, under these false stars, they looked like what they were: conduits of moonlight, a map of my own soul. A tear slid down my cheek and fell into the pool, creating a ripple that disturbed the perfect reflection of the stars. "Kale was right about one thing," I said softly, not looking at Theron. "Your people are strong. Their fire is magnificent. I am quiet, faded. I do not belong here." "You are wrong," he replied, his voice coming from just behind me. I had not heard him move. He was always so silent, for a man so large. "Fire is not the only kind of strength, Alara. There is strength in the tides, which can wear away mountains. There is strength in the roots of a tree, which can shatter rock. There is strength in the silence that holds the stars. Your quiet is not weakness. It is depth." He was standing so close I could feel the heat of his body, a stark contrast to the cool air of the chamber. I felt an overwhelming urge to lean back, to rest in that furnace of strength, but I held myself rigid. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you being so kind?" "Is kindness such a foreign concept?" he asked, a note of sadness in his voice. "Yes," I answered, the single word holding the weight of a lifetime of cruelty. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I have a scar. Here." He gently took my hand and placed it on his side, over his tunic. Beneath the fabric, I felt the unmistakable line of a thick, jagged scar, long healed but still prominent. An assassin's blade. from my own blood. My uncle, who believed I was too young, too weak to rule after my father's death. He tried to kill me when I was just a boy. My fingers trembled against the hard muscle of his side. I could feel the ghost of his pain, the echo of a betrayal that must have cut far deeper than the blade itself. I learned then that trust is the most expensive currency in the world, he continued, his voice low and intimate in the quiet chamber. And that power draws treachery like blood draws flies. I built walls around myself. I became the alpha king they expected. Hard, unforgiving, absolute. I did what I had to do to survive, to hold my kingdom together. He guided my hand away from his side but did not release it, his fingers lacing with mine. When I found you, I saw a survivor. Someone who understood what it meant to be utterly alone, to be surrounded by those who wish you harm. I saw someone who had endured the unthinkable and had not been broken by it. You are not weak, Alara. You are the strongest person I have ever met. His confession hung in the silver air between us, a raw and vulnerable truth. He was showing me his own scars, his own isolation, creating a bridge between his world of golden power and my world of silver solitude. He was not just the powerful guardian. He was a wounded soul, just like me. He saw himself in my survival. In that moment, something inside me, a piece of ice that had been lodged in my heart for a decade, began to melt. I finally turned to face him, my eyes tracing the lines of his harsh, beautiful face. The king who ruled a nation of fire carried his own winter within him. He is not just protecting a bloodline, he is protecting a kindred spirit. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. I looked at our joined hands, his large and sun-kissed, mine small and pale. The contrast was stark, yet they fit together perfectly. For the first time since he had found me in the rain, I did not pull away. The moon chamber became my refuge. I spent hours there each day, finding a measure of peace in its quiet solitude. The magic in the air was a balm to my frayed nerves, a familiar hum that resonated with the silver in my veins. My own dormant abilities began to stir. Sometimes, when I trailed my fingers in the water of the pool, the surface would shimmer with a soft, milky light. Small, tentative flickers of power that were both thrilling and frightening. Theron continued his evening visits, but now they often took place in the chamber. In the soft, forgiving light, away from the prying eyes of the court, the distance between us began to shrink. He told me more of his past, of the burdens of his crown. I, in turn, began to speak of mine. I told him of the silence, of the hunger, of the crushing loneliness of being the last. He listened with an unwavering intensity, his golden eyes filled with a compassion I was slowly, cautiously, beginning to trust. But outside our sanctuary, the tension in the citadel was growing. Kale's faction became more vocal in their opposition. They saw Theron's time with me as a distraction, his defense of me as a betrayal of their ways. The fever Theron had spoken of seemed to be worsening. Fights broke out more frequently in the training yards, and a restless, aggressive energy permeated the fortress. Kale and his followers blamed me. My presence, they claimed, was agitating the imbalance, a foreign body causing a fever to rage. My deepest fears were being given voice, shouted in the halls of my gilded cage. I began to doubt everything. Was Theron wrong? Was I truly a poison to these people? The thought was a constant gnawing anxiety. I saw the worry etched on Theron's face, the growing weight on his shoulders, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a physical blow. Was I the cause of his burden? One afternoon, seeking to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the court, I wandered into the Citadel's vast library. It was a dusty, forgotten place, filled with scrolls and tomes from ages past. As I ran my fingers over the brittle spines, I found a section dedicated to the history of the Lunera, my people. My hands trembled as I pulled out a heavy leather-bound book. The pages were filled with elegant, swirling script and illustrations of my ancestors. They were depicted as serene, graceful figures, their hands weaving threads of moonlight. I read of their magic, a power not of force, but of healing, of soothing, of bringing clarity and calm. They were the dreamers, the healers, the anchors. As I read, a profound sense of loss washed over me, a grief for the heritage I had never known. A passage near the end of the book caught my eye. It spoke of a prophecy, an old Lunara telling. It said that when the sun burned too brightly, when the fire threatened to consume the world, the last daughter of the moon would rise. She would bear the silver map of her people's sorrow on her skin, and her touch would be the only thing that could soothe the raging fever and restore the balance. It described my marks. It described my situation. I was not a cure to be used, but a balancing force, destined to heal. The words on the page seemed to shimmer, and for a moment, the silver on my own skin pulsed with a warm, bright light. It was not a curse. It was a destiny. A terrible, heavy destiny. CTA 6. The tension between them is building. Drop a like if you think they're meant to be together. A noise at the entrance to the library made me look up. Cale stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, his obsidian eyes burning with cold fire. He had been watching me. "Reading fairy tales, little ghost?" he sneered, striding into the room. "Looking for a spell to complete your conquest of our king?" I closed the book, my heart pounding. "I want nothing from your king," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Liar," he hissed, closing the distance between us in 2 quick steps. He loomed over me, his presence suffocating. "You are a parasite. You have weakened him, filled his head with this nonsense of balance and peace. A wolf is not meant for peace. We are meant for conquest, for strength." "There is no strength in burning yourself to ash," I retorted, emboldened by the words I had just read. His face contorted in a snarl. "You know nothing of us." He grabbed the book from my hands, his grip so tight I heard the ancient spine crack. He glanced at the page I had been reading, his eyes scanning the prophecy. A dark, ugly laugh escaped him. This is the poison you have been feeding him. The last daughter of the moon? You are the last daughter of a dead, weak people. And I will not allow you to drag us down into the grave with you." He threw the book to the floor, the pages scattering. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Theron is blind," he growled, his face inches from mine. "But I see you for what you are, a blight, and blights must be purged." A searing pain shot through my arm, but it was not from his grip. It was a cold, dark energy, flowing from him into me. The silver marks on my arm where he held me flared with a painful, sickly black light. The world swam before my eyes, the cold of the blight, a feeling I had not felt since childhood flooding my veins. I cried out, a sound of pure agony as the darkness spread, a spiderweb of black corruption over the pure silver. The pain was excruciating, a cold fire that seemed to freeze my very blood. Kyle released me, and I stumbled back, clutching my arm. The silver filigree was now veined with pulsating black lines, a grotesque mockery of its former beauty. The blight. It was back. Or it had been reawakened. Cale looked at his hand, then at me, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "So, the curse is not so dormant after all," he said, his voice soft and venomous. "Now they will all see. They will see that I was right. You are not a cure. You are the disease." He turned and walked away, leaving me collapsing on the floor of the library, The ancient words of the prophecy scattered around me like dead leaves as a terrifying, familiar cold spread from my arm through the rest of my body. I managed to stagger back to my rooms, my body racked with shivers, the spreading black veins on my arm a terrifying secret hidden beneath the sleeve of my dress. The pain was a dull, constant ache, but the fear was a sharp, stabbing blade. Kale had not just hurt me. He had proven my deepest terror to be true. I was a vessel for the blight. My presence here was a danger. The servant girl who brought my evening meal gasped when she saw my face, my skin pale and beaded with sweat. She fled without a word. Panic began to set in, a cold, suffocating tide. I had to hide this. If Theron saw, if the court saw, Kale's words would become their truth. They would cast me out, or worse, destroy me. When Theron arrived at sunset, I tried to appear normal. I sat in a chair far from the light, keeping my afflicted arm hidden in the folds of my skirt. But he was a wolf. His senses were too keen. He stopped just inside the door, his golden eyes narrowing. "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "Nothing," I lied, my voice trembling. "I am just tired." He moved across the room in 2 silent strides, his presence overwhelming. "Do not lie to me, Alara," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. He knelt before me, his eyes scanning my face filled with concern. "You are pale. You are trembling. What happened?" He reached for my hand and I instinctively pulled away, a gasp of pain escaping my lips as the movement jarred my arm. His eyes darted to my arm and his expression hardened. "Show me." It was not a request. With dread coiling in my stomach, I slowly pushed up my sleeve. In the dim light of the room, the black veins stood out starkly against my pale skin, a web of pure corruption centered on the bruises left by Kale's grip. The silver around them was dull, lifeless. Theron stared at it, his face becoming a mask of stone. The air grew cold, the silence in the room absolute. I watched his face, searching for the reverence, the compassion I had come to rely on. But it was gone. In its place was something I could not read. Was it horror? Revulsion? He looked from my arm to my face, his golden eyes unreadable, distant. And in that moment, for the first time, he looked at me the way everyone else did, like I was a thing to be feared. "Kale did this," I whispered, the words desperate. "He touched me." Something dark flowed from him. Theron's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He did not seem to hear me. His focus was entirely on the creeping blackness on my skin. "The blight," he breathed, the words barely audible. He stood up, taking a step back from me. That single step was a canyon opening between us. It was a rejection more profound than any blow. He, the one who had called my marks a miracle, was now backing away from them in fear. The last fragile remnants of my hope shattered. The world narrowed to the crushing weight of his silent judgment. He was my protector, my anchor. And he was afraid of me. His counselors were summoned. They arrived with Kyle, who wore a mask of grim concern that did not reach his triumphant eyes. They stood in my chambers, looking at me, at my arm, their faces a mixture of fear and vindication. "It is as I feared," one of the elders said, his voice grave. "The blight was never gone. It was merely sleeping. Her presence here, in the heart of our power, has reawakened it." "She is a danger to us all," Kale added, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "We must quarantine her, for the safety of the kingdom, before it spreads." They all looked to Theron, waiting for his command. He stood apart, his back to me, staring out the balcony into the night. I could not see his face, only the rigid line of his shoulders. He was their king. His first duty was to them, to their safety. I was an outsider, a risk, a failed experiment. I waited for him to turn, to defend me, to rage at Kale for his lies. I waited for the man who had stood between me and a threat, the man who had shown me his scars. But he remained silent, his back a wall of stone. And his silence was the cruelest answer of all. He was hesitating. He was weighing my life against the welfare of his people, and in his mind, the scales were tipping. In that devastating silence, I understood. I had been a fool to trust, a fool to hope. There was no place for me here. There was no place for me anywhere. I was a curse, just as they had always said. And a curse must be contained or eradicated. If he would not cast me out, I would have to do it myself. While they debated my fate, while the king I had begun to care for stood frozen by duty and fear, I made my choice. I would not be their prisoner. I would not be their patient. I would not wait for them to decide whether to lock me away or put me down. I would disappear. I would run back to the silence, back to the woods. It was the only place a monster like me belonged. Slipping into the shadows of the room, a ghost once more, I fled. CTA 7. Oh no. Will Alara be accepted? Comment your predictions below and hit like to see what happens next. The Citadel was a maze, but fear was a brutally efficient guide. I clung to the shadows, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, the cold poison in my arm a constant, sickening reminder of my monstrous nature. Every passing guard, every burst of laughter from a feasting hall sent a jolt of terror through me. They were hunting me. I knew it. Theron would have realized I was gone. He would send his wolves, his perfect trackers, to bring me back to my cage. I had to be faster, smarter. I had to be nothing but a whisper in the stone corridors. My flight was not just from them, it was for them. The prophecy was a lie, a cruel joke. I was not a healer. I was a plague. My only act of salvation would be my removal. By running, I was protecting them from myself. It was a bitter, solitary act of love for the king who had failed to love me back. I found a postern gate, one used for servants and supplies, left unguarded in the chaos of my discovery. I slipped out into the cool night air, the freedom a sharp, painful breath in my lungs. The scorched plains surrounding the citadel stretched out before me, bathed in the pale light of a crescent moon. My moon. It offered no comfort, only a sad, silvery light on my escape. I ran. I did not know where I was going, only that I had to get away. Away from the golden eyes that had looked at me with fear, away from the hope that had proven to be a trap. The Wailing Woods, my former home, lay 100 leagues to the west. It was a suicidal journey on foot, but it was the only direction I knew. I would return to my hovel, to my isolation, and I would let the blight consume me there, alone, where I could harm no one else. The plains were treacherous in the dark, and my body was weak, the cold of the blight seeping into my bones, making my limbs heavy and clumsy. I stumbled often. My hands and knees scraped raw, but I kept going, driven by a desperate, self-loathing urgency. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher in the sky. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak, dragging me down. The pain in my arm had become a fiery agony, the black veins now reaching my shoulder, creeping toward my heart. I knew I did not have long. Finally, my legs gave out. I collapsed in the dust and rock, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. I had not made it far enough. The citadel was still a menacing silhouette against the horizon. They would find me. And then, I heard it. A howl. Not the grieving wind of the woods, but the call of a lichen on the hunt. And it was close. Panic gave me a fresh surge of adrenaline. I scrambled to my feet and began to run again, a pathetic, stumbling gait. But it was no use. A figure appeared on the rise before me, silhouetted against the moon. It was not Theron, it was Kale. He was alone, and he was smiling. "Leaving so soon, little ghost?" he called out, his voice carrying on the still night air. The party was just getting started. He began to walk toward me, his movements slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. He was a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Theron is a fool," Kyle said as he closed the distance, his obsidian eyes gleaming. "He sees you and dreams of balance, of healing. He is sentimental, weakened by legends and regret. I see you and I see the truth. You are a loose thread from a forgotten age, a thread that must be cut before it unravels everything we have built. You did this to me," I accused, my voice trembling but filled with a new, cold fury. "That darkness, it came from you." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Clever little ghost. Yes, a gift from an old friend. A master of shadows who helped me orchestrate the original blight that cleansed your useless people from the world. He taught me how to manipulate the echoes of its power. I had hoped to finish the job then, but you slipped through the cracks. No matter. It is a simple thing to correct that oversight now." His confession was a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from my lungs. He was the monster behind it all, the architect of my people's doom, of my life's solitude. He had watered the root of my sorrow with the blood of my kin, a rage I had never known, white-hot and absolute, burned through the cold of the blight. The grief and loneliness of a decade coalesced into a single burning point of hatred for the man standing before me. "Why?" I choked out. "Why destroy them?" "Because they were a brake on our power," he snarled, his mask of civility gone, revealing the seething ambition beneath. "They counseled caution, patience, peace. They kept us chained to this mountain when we should have been conquering continents. With them gone, we were free. And with Theron gone, I will lead our people to the glory they deserve. Killing you is just the first step. When they find your body, corrupted by the blight, they will see that Theron's sentimentality was a fatal flaw. They will turn to a leader who is strong. They will turn to me." He lunged, his hands outstretched, no longer holding any dark magic but aiming for my throat. This would be a simple physical death. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground. This was it. The end of my line, a pathetic, dusty death at the hands of the man who had destroyed my world. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the killing blow never landed. A blur of motion, a roar that was more beast than man, and the weight of Kale was suddenly gone. I opened my eyes. Theron was there. He stood over me, his body a taut line of incandescent fury. He had Kale by the throat, lifting him effortlessly from the ground. Theron's eyes were not molten gold anymore. They were blazing suns, his face a mask of primal alpha rage. "You!" Theron growled, the single word a death sentence. "You poisoned her. You lie. You betray. You defile my honor and the memory of a people I swore to protect." Kale choked, clawing at Theron's hand. "She is a curse," he gasped. "I am saving us." "You are saving nothing," Theron roared, and he threw Kale through the air. The powerful warrior landed in a heap 20 feet away. Theron did not pursue. He turned and knelt beside me, his blazing eyes softening as they took in my terrified, pain-racked form. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice thick with anguish. Reached for me, and this time, I did not flinch. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." I hesitated. "In my fear for my kingdom, I failed you. I will never forgive myself." "You came," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I thought I was a fool." He cut me off, his voice raw. "A blind, terrified fool. Hearing his lies in the council chamber, seeing the fear in their eyes, I let my duty cloud my heart. But when I found you gone, nothing else mattered. My kingdom is worthless without its soul. And you are its soul. Kale was getting to his feet, drawing a wicked-looking blade. Touching, he sneered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Now you can die together, he charged. Theron rose to meet him, moving with impossible speed. The fight was a whirlwind of savage grace, blade and claw, fire and shadow. Theron was magnificent, a king fighting for more than just a throne. He was fighting for his atonement. But Kale was powerful, fueled by decades of resentment and dark ambition. He fought dirty, landing a deep cut on Theron's side. Theron roared in pain, but did not falter. As I watched them fight, as I watched Theron bleed for me, something inside me shifted. The prophecy I had read. The last daughter of the moon would rise. Her touch would soothe the raging fever. The fever was not just in the Sunstone people. It was in Kale. A fever of ambition. It was in Theron. The fever of his rage. And the blight. It was the ultimate fever. A sickness of magic itself. The rage and grief within me. My hatred for Kale. It all began to transform. It was not a fire that wanted to destroy, but a light that wanted to heal. To purify. CTA 8. This is getting intense. If you're on the edge of your seat, drop a like and let me know in the comments what you think will happen to Kale. I struggled to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I clutched my blighted arm. It was a conduit. Kale had poured his darkness into me through it. Perhaps I could pour it back out, but not as darkness, as light. I focused on the pain, on the cold. I did not fight it. I embraced it. I reached deep inside myself, past the fear and the loneliness, to the core of what I was. I was a Lunara, a keeper of the moon's quiet magic, a healer, an anchor. The silver marks on my skin began to glow, not with a faint, timid light, but with a sudden, brilliant intensity. The light was pure, white, and powerful. It pushed against the black veins, consuming them, purifying them. The pain receded, replaced by a surge of incredible power, cool and calm and absolute. My skin blazed like the full moon, and the light erupted from me. The wave of pure silver energy washed over the battlefield. Theron and Kale were thrown apart by the force of it. Theron staggered, the bleeding on his side slowing, the fury in his eyes banking, replaced by awe. He stared at me, at the radiant being I had become. Kale screamed. The silver light clung to him, not burning, but cleansing. The dark magic he had harbored for so long was being torn from him, ripped from his soul. He writhed on the ground as tendrils of black smoke were pulled from his body, dissolving into nothingness in the face of my light. When it was over, he lay gasping, diminished, the fire in his eyes extinguished, leaving only the empty black pits of his ambition. He was broken. I stood in the center of my own radiance, the silver marks on my skin now shining with a clean, potent light. The blight was gone, not just from my arm, but from my soul. I was not a ruin. I was not a curse. I was a power. I was the moon, and I had found my strength in the darkest of nights. Theron walked toward me, his steps slow, hesitant, his golden eyes filled with a reverence that dwarfed anything he had shown before. He stopped before me, his face a mixture of wonder and shame. "Ilara," he whispered, as if my name were a prayer. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped my cheek. His touch was warm, and my light seemed to surge toward it, welcoming it. "Forgive me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw your mark as a symbol of survival. I was wrong. It is a symbol of strength, a power I was too blind to see." "You came back for me," I said, my voice clear and steady. "You fought for me." "I will always fight for you," he vowed, his thumb stroking my cheek. not as a king protecting a relic, but as a man protecting the other half of his soul. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The sun is nothing without the moon to temper its fire. I am nothing without you. In the quiet of the plains, under the light of the witness moon, he made a new vow. Not to my bloodline, but to me. And this time, I believed him. I leaned into his touch, my silver light mingling with the golden aura of his own, and for the first time in my life, I was not alone. We were a balance. We were whole. CTA 9. Yes. Did you see that coming? Like this video if you're loving their romance and comment your favorite moment so far. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Theron's guards, who arrived minutes after the confrontation, took the broken Kale into custody. His confession, forced from him by Theron's unyielding fury, revealed the full depth of his treachery, including the loyalties of his co-conspirators within the Citadel. The purge was clean and absolute. Theron, with a newfound clarity and purpose, rooted out the corruption that had festered in the shadows of his court. There was no more hesitation in him, no more doubt. He moved with the certainty of a king who knew not only his own strength, but the strength of his queen. My return to the Sunstone Citadel was not as a prisoner or a guest, but as a savior. The story of my transformation, of Kale's defeat at my hand as much as Theron's, spread like wildfire. The people who had once whispered and sneered now lowered their heads in reverence. They had seen my power, the pure, cleansing light that had radiated across the plains. They had seen their king, bleeding and battered, stand by my side. They no longer saw a blight. They saw salvation. They saw their moon queen. The fear in their eyes was replaced by awe, their hostility by a desperate, hopeful respect. I was still a creature of the night in their world of sun, but they understood now that the night was not something to be feared. It was necessary. It brought peace, and stars, and the promise of a new day. My own healing was more profound than just the purging of the blight. The silver marks on my skin remained, but they felt different. They were no longer a brand of sorrow, but a testament to my resilience, a part of my identity that I wore with a quiet pride. The power that flowed through them was calm and steady, a gentle tide within me. I spent my days not in hiding, but walking the halls of the Citadel, my presence a soothing balm on the fever of the Lycan people. Fights in the training yards became less about rage and more about skill. The restless, aggressive energy of the court subsided, replaced by a focused strength, a disciplined passion. My quietness was no longer seen as weakness. It was seen as a wellspring of calm from which they could all draw. Theron was my constant shadow, my unwavering partner. The guilt he felt for his moment of hesitation was a deep wound, one he worked to heal not with words, but with actions. He included me in his counsels, his voice seeking mine on every matter. He deferred to my wisdom in disputes, showing his people that my perspective was as valuable as his own. He created a space for me, not just in his home, but in his rule. We were two sides of a coin, the sun and the moon, fire and water, ruling in perfect harmonious balance. The walls between us crumbled completely, leaving only a deep and abiding connection that was more profound than any spoken words of love. One evening, he led me back to the moon chamber. It was the first time we had been there since my flight. The starlit room was just as I remembered it, a pocket of serene twilight. But this time, I did not feel like an intruder seeking refuge. I felt like I was coming home. We stood before the still pool, our reflections staring back at us, his tall and golden, mine alight with a soft silver glow. I failed my first vow, Theron said, his voice low and heavy with remembered pain as he looked at our reflections. The vow to protect your bloodline. I allowed my fear and my duty to blind me to the truth, and I almost lost you. He turned to face me, taking both of my hands in his. His golden eyes were earnest, vulnerable. Let me make a new one. Not to a bloodline, not to a queen, but to you, to Alara. He knelt before me, the mighty Alpha King on one knee before the last daughter of the moon. The gesture was so deeply humble, so profoundly reverent, it made my heart ache. I vow to be your anchor, as you are mine, he said, his voice ringing with the unbreakable strength of an oath. I vow to honor your strength, to cherish your quiet, and to stand by your side against any shadow. I vow my heart, my life, my soul. I am yours, Ilara, in this life and all that come after. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so pure and overwhelming it felt like starlight. I reached out, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. And I said, my voice thick with emotion, am yours thereon. I was a ghost, and you gave me a home. I was a ruin, and you showed me my strength. I will be the calm to your fire, the moon to your sun. Always. He rose, his hands moving to cup my face. He looked at me as if he were trying to memorize every detail, every silver line on my skin. You saved us, he whispered. You saved me from myself. We saved each other, I corrected softly. Then he leaned down and kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion and fire, like the people he ruled. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, of reverence, of two solitary souls finally finding their other half. It was a promise, a seal on the vows we had made. It was the quiet harmony of the sun and the moon, meeting at last in a perfect eclipse. In that kiss, the last vestiges of the lonely, frightened girl I had been washed away, leaving only the woman, the queen, who had found her place not in the shadows, but in the heart of a king. Our life together became a new legend, a story told to children in the firelight. The tale of the Sun King and the Moon Queen, who brought balance to a fevered world. The Sunstone Citadel was transformed. Gardens were cultivated in the courtyards, filled with night-blooming flowers that opened their petals to my light. The moon chamber was unsealed, becoming a place of meditation and peace for all, a sanctuary where the fiercest warriors could find a moment of calm. My people were not forgotten. With Theron's help, I began the slow work of recovering their history, of rebuilding their legacy not as a lost tribe, but as a founding pillar of this new, balanced kingdom. I was the last of my line, but I would ensure we were never forgotten. I was the keeper of the song, and now I had a world to sing it to. CTA 10. What an incredible ending. If you loved Alara and Theron's story, please like this video and comment what you want to see next. Your support means everything. Months turned into a year. The kingdom thrived under our joint rule. The fever was gone, replaced by a healthy, vibrant strength. Theron's people, once so hostile, now looked upon me with a fierce, protective loyalty. I was their queen, the calm heart of their storm. One night, Theron and I stood on the balcony of our chambers, the same balcony where I had once felt so trapped and alone. The night was clear, the sky a vast expanse of diamond-dusted velvet. I leaned against him, his arms wrapped securely around me, his chin resting on the top of my head. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. The silver marks on my skin glowed with a soft, contented light, a perfect match to the gentle warmth radiating from his body. Below us, the kingdom was peaceful, sleeping under the watchful gaze of the moon. The silence was no longer the hollow quiet of loss. It was the full, rich silence of peace, of belonging. I was no longer an echo. I was the beginning of a new song. I was the last of my bloodline, but I was not the end of the story. I was home.